picture a drunk baby using your app. And if a drunk baby could use your app, then it's good, simple user experience.
In this video, I have Phil Scarfi from Pioneer Mobile Applications. Pioneer Mobile Applications creates mobile apps for entrepreneurs and businesses. In this video, you'll learn all the steps required to take an idea and turn it into an app. And if you're just tuning in, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. You'll be able to find the other videos in the description below. And if you're new here, welcome to the Side Hustle Life channel, where I interview successful entrepreneurs and learn how they built their business, so we can take the same lessons and same learnings and apply it to creating a side hustle of our own. So if you want to learn more about creating a side hustle, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video, because you're only one side hustle away from creating a life you want. And if this business model is a good fit for you, is something you're interested in, make sure to grab the free Creating Your First App starter guide in the description below. So talk to us about the process. Like, where does it begin, and walk us through the steps that are involved in going from idea to actual, finished application.
Everybody's scenario usually is a little bit different. Some people come to us with, just an idea. Some people come to us, started coding themselves, or they had, they just dove in and had an offshore developer start doing it. Didn't work out too well. So I'll describe the process from just the idea stage to the launching of the product. The first step that we usually go through is the conceptualization step, which pretty much before we even get started on any developing, we take this idea that this person has. One, we want to make sure that they are passionate about it, because, a successful project, if you're not passionate about it, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's the whole idea conceptualization, making sure it's a solid idea. It makes sense. It has a good use case. It solves problems. The next step after that is the market validation. So it could be a great idea, but next we want to make sure that users are actually going to use it. So this is going out, doing some, just market validation, doing surveys to people, not telling people, friends and family out there, the exact app idea, but kind of beating around the bush, where we'll ask questions just about the idea, things that they think would solve a problem, and see if that relates and kind of runs parallel with the app idea that we finalized.
I'll take a pause here. I think this is a really important point that you're making. You called out specifically that you don't want to come out and say exactly what the idea is, but to ask questions that don't give the idea away. Like, what's the purpose behind that approach?
I found that a lot of people usually, one, are a little bit insecure with their idea, so they don't want people stealing it. That's one of the biggest ones. The second one, though, is I found that when you're doing these surveys, you kind of can corrupt data, your results, essentially. So if you're asking your friends and family, one example is, say, you're building an application for, the classroom setting, how the students are answering questions and retaining the information that he's teaching. So you wouldn't exactly go and just say, listen, I want to make an app that is going to tell the teacher, if you understand the app or not. You would kind of beat around with it and say, do you find yourself that the professor is moving too quick? He's, teaching different subjects or something like that. Because if you go out and say the idea right away, and especially if it's a friend or a family member, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, no, that's a good idea. But they might be, legit, and it might actually be a good idea, and they believe it's a good idea. Or they might just be a really good friend and say, oh, yeah, no, that's a good idea, because they don't want to insult you. Essentially beating around the bush, it gets you a little bit more accurate results, I found.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So now once you have validated this with, people that are your network, what's the next step?
Yeah, after that, so once we have, a solid idea, we validated the idea with the market, we go into the design phase. So between branding and designing, figure out what the app is going to look like, the color schemes that it's going to use, pretty much how you want people to recognize that this is your app. So when they hear the name of your company, they know exactly what you're talking about. They have a clear picture right in their mind. So between this and then making sure that the setup and layout of the application is easy to use.
What tips do you have for people that are out there and thinking of like an app? They have an app idea, but they don't have a name yet for it. They don't have a way. They don't have an idea of how it looks. Like, how can they take steps to conceptualize that a little bit more?
Surf the app store, see what types of apps are out there and how they're laid out. See how some of the more popular apps, what makes them successful. Because obviously, if they're successful, they have a good user experience. So you want to figure out the different components in their app, make things simple for users. One of my past clients, he pretty much said, you got to essentially picture a drunk baby using your app. And if a drunk baby could use your app, then it's good, simple user experience. A lot of times when people design apps, they'll put a ton of functionality in the interface, and it makes sense to them because they're the ones creating it. But when they show somebody else that they want to download the app, they'll look at it and have no idea, what to press. So there's definitely the inspiration process, discovery process, where you search and other things that are already out there and getting the inspiration and pulling different pieces of that and make it into your own branding. In terms of finding names, that's always, believe it or not, one of the hardest things I've found is finding a good name. Obviously, you don't have to worry about having a set name at the very beginning because obviously the idea is the most important part. This is another thing you can kind of do A/B testing with. So come up with a few different ideas, shoot them out to family and friends. It could be just a simple question like, would you download an app that is called this versus this? Or you can tell them the app idea and ask them which they think fits better. So doing a little bit market research in that aspect as well could help.
What do you think about which is better typically? Is it a unique name or an obvious name for your app?
Figure out that the main purpose or the problem that your app is solving, and you can do Google searches for words that symbolize different things.
What about the icon itself? Like, how do you design an icon that stands out when people are browsing through the App Store and looking for applications?
You want to make something bold that just stands out. So when they're swiping through their home screen, they can easily recognize that. So this could be, a simple icon in the middle with a solid color background. I found works the most because it's bold, it stands out. When they're swiping through their screens, they can just quickly see that's the app that they're looking for.
Yeah, well, one technique that I've heard, and I would love your thoughts on it, or two things, is that you want to try to search for the application that you're creating and then try to pick a color scheme that's different than what's already there. So if you see a lot of applications that are blue, you probably don't want a blue application. You might want an orange or a red application icon because that would certainly stand out when people are searching through the directory. And the second thing that I've heard is that, or tip is that because the icon is super small, you have to keep that in mind because a lot of times people are working with designs that are much larger on their computer screen. And when you shrink it down to the App Store, a lot of the details that you included that were visible at a larger scale now become invisible, maybe even become blurry or confusing to someone that cannot see it at that smaller scale. So yeah, I would love your thoughts on those two things I've heard.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of that second thing that you said, because when people design it, it's on a big screen versus on the phone, it's small. That kind of keeps it, goes back to how I was saying, just keep the icon as simple as possible. When it comes to the Apple's App Store, for example, you're submitting an image that's 1024 by 1024 pixels, which is a lot larger than when you're going to see it on the phone. It could be 20 by 20 pixels or up to 80 by 80 pixels. So there's a big difference right there.
10 times smaller in some cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you don't really want to worry about, trying to get all these little designs in to the logo because you got to take the perspective of just kind of zooming out of it and seeing if everything's going to look cluttered on it. And usually when things start looking cluttering, you take out these the little lines and little white spaces that you might have, and you just make one solid image. And from that, you get that bold icon that will stand out. In terms of the first thing that you said, with changing the app icon color, obviously that's one strategy, but at the same time, I wouldn't always just rely on that because you want to make sure that you're going to have your own color scheme that you like, that you think fits with your product. So you don't want to have to change that color scheme solely because there's other apps out there. So look at Facebook and Twitter. They're both social media platforms, but they both use different shades of blue. So if you're creating a social media platform and you want it to be, blue too, it's not a huge deal. But obviously, I see what you're saying. When you're scrolling through, you want something that stands out. But a lot of this will come from that icon that would be in the center of that square box.
What happens after you guys have decided on the branding and figure out the way that the look of the application? What's next?
Yeah, so this is when things start to get a little bit more fun, I guess. This is when the development starts. So the very first stage of development is creating a plan for what you're going to accomplish first. It's good to come up with time estimates when you're going to have XYZ feature done. Create milestones. You have that idea of everything, how everything's going to fit together, which will help you essentially create good code when it comes to the developers. The way I work with a lot of my clients is we'll have the milestones. So I will say XYZ feature will be done by September 1st. And once it's finished, I will send that up to you via Test Flight, which is a beta distribution platform via Apple. If it's an Apple app, obviously, they'll be able to test it locally on their phone. If they have friends and family that want to test the features out, just pretty much need their email addresses. They can test it out. And as we're developing the product, it's kind of a cycle going back and forth, making sure it fits the specifications that were set out, making any changes necessary. Once that's all good to go, we move on to the next set of features. And, eventually it'll come down to, all right, all the features are done. We're ready for, say, a public beta testing program. Robinhood actually had a really interesting and powerful strategy where they pretty much had users before, months before they had an actual app. They pretty much described the app. They had the screenshots, pretty much described what this app would do. And they were able to get millions and millions of people's interest to sign up for the app. They got invitation codes. And if you invite friends, you get bumped up in the list. So you have access to the app a lot earlier. When it comes to beta testing the app on our end and getting users on board, we try to use a similar strategy where we'll create a little website, pretty much do the same thing, describe the app, get users on board. And, if they're inviting other people to the app, they get bumped up in the list. The people that are more engaged essentially can be the testers because obviously they're most likely going to have the most feedback and useful feedback and productive feedback. Essentially, once that's all set and ready, we will upload it to the app stores, get marketing all set and ready, work with the client or just figure out a general marketing strategy to get the app out there. And then it's off with the races.
So the timeline that you just walked through, like how long does that typically take? Like what can slow it down? What can speed it up? And, based on your experience? It
depends on the size of the project. On average, I found that it takes about 3 to 4 months to go from idea to launching in the app store. The main thing that always does slow it down, the communication back and forth from a client, because there's going to be times when you need information from them or you want their feedback on something that you worked on, and they might go a week without being able to test it just yet because they might have a full-time job, for example, where this is their side hustle. That's why it's very important in the beginning to have all the specifications all figured out, because then that's going to lessen the amount of times that you have to wait on hearing back from a client.
Got it. So yeah, that's actually a good question about communication with the team, with the people that like you that these app creators are working with. What kind of deliverables or what should they have ready, prepared before they even begin to approach someone like you?
So we get such a wide variety of people that come to us. A lot of times it is just an idea, and a lot of people just don't know how to get started with that idea. Every single client that comes to me with just that idea, I always tell them, write down all the features that you want, write down the problem that the app is going to solve, and write down how the app is going to be solving that problem.
Thank you for watching. Now, the question of the day is, what part of that process of creating an application is your favorite part? For me personally, I like the process of thinking about the user design, thinking about how a user can experience the application. Post your answer in the comments below. And if you think this business model is a good fit for you, something that you're interested in, make sure to grab the free Creating Your First App Starter Guide in the description below. And if you want to learn more about side hustles or specifically about app development, make sure to check out the other videos in this series or other videos that I have on side hustles.